questions about seeds, seeding mixes. We got one to kick us off here. All right. Got a thesis here. In college, I did a research project suggesting that the presence of invasive seeds could negatively impact germination rate and success of natives. Research on this topic is limited. Has anyone involved in restoration efforts observed something similar? Could this be a hindrance to those species that struggle to establish? So I'm guessing we're talking about aleopathy? I don't know. Aleopathy? Is that the right word? I've definitely heard, I don't respond to these typically, leave someone else to answer it, but certainly wheat with wheat grasses is a consideration. But anyone want to talk specifically to it? Owen, Jay, Dan? Owen's got experience. You want to come stand up here again? I think you could just give another 20 minutes of presentation if you wanted.
He's super aggressive when he does that.
Okay, so the question is, could the presence of invasive seeds, or maybe you say invasive species, negatively impact germination rate and success of natives? And if you want to look at the whole question, you can.
I would say my best answer to that question is we really don't know. Anytime you have invasives, they are going to definitely hinder a grass planting. But I would say as far as establishment, let's say Canada thistle, for example, we've had grass plantings established just fine in Canada thistle. Just with the yearly maintenance you have to do that they'll kind of go into next year. Tomorrow, and some of those presentations. I can tell you for a fact, one thing that doesn't help with stand establishment is when you have a bunch of Canada thistle, and we used to do this because we're idiots, is you go in and you actually spray a herbicide on that Canada thistle and you kill all the forbs that you planted. So it's a big waste of money. I don't know. Does anyone ever have a better example? Like it's a really touchy.
Conversely, there's plantings like, as you mentioned, Canada thistle, and you put your sunflowers in, they're in the same family, and the sunflowers affect the Canada thistle. So it works both ways.
One thing that I think we're still learning is there's a lot of, I think there's probably reasons for truth behind all of them, but like some of the things that Owen and I discuss, Brett and Joe and the gang kind of is like planting into wheat and wheat stubble. I'm going to let Owen speak to that, to what they've kind of found. Some of the things I think that we think are always true, and we're going to talk about this a little bit with upcoming presentations on prepping and things like that, but some of the things that we assume to be true from the farming world don't necessarily always result in negative responses when we anticipate that they will. Like I'm going to present tomorrow some wheat trials, and it's not perfect, but it's like kind of like what Owen said. When you do get those establishment and you got that mix, if you spray it all out, what's the point? You got no shot. I had another competition. So along the same lines, to broaden the question, if we're worried about competition or aleopathy, one of the things that I still struggle with is the idea of putting a nurse crop in with a native planting. I really have never seen any proof. I've seen a lot of anecdotal, like, hey, it really worked, but I didn't see where you did the same thing and proved that it wouldn't have worked without that carrier. I do get the idea of a carrier, the concept of the physical carrier, to run the seed through a drill better, or maybe to broadcast and get some weight to it. But the actual logic of putting a short-term cover crop, or a cover like a wheat or an oat with your planting, to me is, I'd like to hear some more. I'd like to have a debate on that. I'd just like to know what people have found.
No, I think that's good stuff and something I've thought about a lot too and practiced a little bit as well as kind of using that nurse crop. And I guess what I kind of boiled it down to is, you put out your perennial mix of, desirable species essentially. And this gets back to the weed stuff. But, you're instantly fighting weeds or invasive food, whatever. Something that you don't want is coming back up through that mix. And the only reason I decided to play with the nurse crop a little bit because I could look at it as something that I put out there, something that I wanted to see on the landscape. And I think you can be, creative and flexible with what you want to use as a nurse crop, different annual cover crops and stuff like that. But I think the competition thing is, real. So, you're kind of still playing that game a little bit. But it's like, do you want to be fighting weeds afterwards, or do you want to be a little bit more at peace maybe because you know that the competition is occurring with something that you intentionally put out there? So, I don't know. That's kind of how I thought about it before.
Before we go too much farther, Pete, would you define what a nurse crop is, just so that we don't assume knowledge?
Go ahead. What do you mean by a nurse crop? We're talking the same language.
Yeah, so like a nurse crop would be a companion crop. It could be whatever you want it to be, but it's something that you kind of plant along with your, desirable mix, your perennial mix, to basically nurse it. I think the thought behind it is to kind of nurse it along and to help it grow a little bit, which is a little conflicting with the competition thing. But it's there to kind of essentially help your perennial mix.
Tends to be an annual grass, cheap.
And I think, we talked about Canada Wild Rye a little bit today, and I think, in a way that could also be kind of looked at as a nurse crop too. Something that kind of grows up and goes away quick, and it's playing with succession in a lot of this stuff. And so it's trying to release things at different times. It's just long-term. There's long-term management that goes into all that stuff. So I guess what I think about too is, or a thought that came to me today too, and I apologize if I'm rambling on here a little bit, but the idea that in these restoration projects that you can go into a project, put your perennial mix down, and kind of walk away essentially is not really, I don't think, is not the right way to go about it, I don't think. Even from seeding operations and things like that, we try to, I feel like, put this stuff into a box as humans so we can kind of understand it better. But really, we're dealing with, succession, like I said, kind of succession in the process of plants, kind of living and dying on the landscape. And so when you go into these projects, I feel like it's good to think long term. It's really almost never ending. And so I even think that same thing with seeding operations too. It doesn't necessarily have to just be a one-time seeding deal. If you can continually manage the piece of ground and put more seed out there, you can be more flexible that way too. So kind of to that idea of a nurse crop as well. But
Sure. Does anyone else have either a question or more commentary, like where you have used a nurse crop or not used a nurse crop, thought that it might be valuable? Oh, Jay.
So we used to use nurse crops a lot when I first started with the agency 30-some years ago, and we've really gone away from it. Nurse crops seem to rob what we need the most, and that's water. And so we just kind of get away from it. Now, with our lower seeding rates than, the 30 pounds or the 30 seeds per square foot thing, we do use something to kind of carry our seed from time to time. So we might use, a rolled oat or a cracked corn or something to help carry that seed through the drill. But we don't hardly ever use a nurse crop anymore. Now, the aleopathy thing, we're going into wheat or something like that. Boy, that's a hit and miss thing. We kind of just started ignoring it because you never know. Sometimes it seems like we have problems and sometimes we don't. And so we don't worry too much about that anymore.
Sorry if this seems like I'm picking on NRCS with this one a little bit, but I've run into it personally a lot where might get circumvented with diversity or the addition of introduced species. I've found it interesting, the dynamic of we're talking about diversity and we want to, as a group, increase it, but when it comes to our programs, we have very little fight on if a producer raises alarm or FSA raises alarm or something like that. Whereas getting over 5 or 6 species is panic mode, right? When are we going to start learning from past mistakes of introduced species should not be included? You know, give plenty of examples of things that we as a group or our ancestors as a group once recommended: smooth brome, Siberian elm, crested wheatgrass, but yet we're still trying to do things on, say, saline ground using tall wheatgrass, green wheatgrass, all of these things that, because they establish quickly, though we have native wheatgrasses that also establish on these, and our native grasses actually took the salt down in the first place. It's interesting that on the CRP manual, there's a short line. I have it framed behind my, not framed, but taped up behind my desk. It's a short snippet. Don't know if anybody but me and the person who wrote it, put it in, has seen it, but it says introduced species should be avoided. It's in the CRP manual. But yet we still can't get away from them. And given that grazing has become a focal point, we're putting things like tall wheatgrass that have a low palatability. And I just wonder if that's something we can wrestle with as a group. I don't know that anybody needs to respond. I just want to pose that.
I don't think you're wrong. I think those are really good points, and I think, Jay, you stand, because we have lost the handle, I think, a little bit in South Dakota because of the, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but we kind of lost the handle on our state tech committee on CRP and just programs. Like, we just don't meet anymore. 10 years ago, we actively met as a subcommittee, and we would discuss these things at length, and then we would bring them back to the quarterly state tech committee meetings, and it was really well received. And there's really no reason so nothing bad happened. It just, I think we just kind of faded away, and maybe this is a reason to resurge that. You know, this is look at this group of people, like, be a pretty powerful advisory role in South Dakota for state tech committee. You know, we all have a part of it. It's an open thing, and it's like one of the greatest resources that we just don't take enough advantage of in the state. So that's just my comment on that. I think there is an avenue through NRCS for this direct feedback, and we're just really not taking advantage of it.
Yeah, you're correct, Pete, on that. And the other thing we have to watch for is that we're spending government dollars, and so part of our charge as NRCS employees is that we try to get the most bang for the buck. And so if a producer comes to us and only thing they're interested is doing CRP for the sake of doing CRP and getting the payment, we kind of have to watch what we do as far as how much money we're spending. And so if it's, for example, that saline mix picture that we had up there, if the guy's coming in and just wanting CRP for the sake of CRP, I'm not going to throw a bunch of high dollar seed out there on that saline seep when tall wheatgrass and western wheatgrass can probably do the same thing for a lot less money. We have to watch our goals. We have to watch what the producer wants and what the agency wants and what the program's going to allow us to do. We always have sideboards in everything we do. But yes, we do try to incorporate more natives into our mixes and try to get rid of or back off on the invasive cool season mixes or grasses that we have to get something a lot better out there.
Sounds good. Any more questions? Supper's smelling pretty good. I have a question for Owen. How many species is too many? At what point does it become redundant?
I don't know if anyone's done any research on that yet.
Oh, okay.
Just go all out.
Okay, sounds good.
Just, I guess, how much money you have.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, we have about 15 minutes here of a break before supper, so if you need to check into your motel room or take a break, it's supposed to get served at 5:15. Based on smell, it might be ready now, which would be great, but we're going to wrap up again, pick up everything from the room. I hope you'll join us for the social at 6:30 right after supper, and we'll see you tomorrow morning again.